So today I'm going to be doing a review of These Violent Delights by Gong. Got this book in a fairy loot box, and I'm kind of glad that I did because I don't know if the just vague description would have been appealing to me enough to pick it up. I'm going to start with a vague description about what the book's about and then cover some other topics. I'll have little cards in between. I've done this a few times now, so I'm not going to get into depth explaining those categories, and I'm just going to get started. So These Violent Delights takes place in 1926 to be precise, Shanghai. We are stuck right in the middle of a blood feud going on between the Scarlets and the White Flowers. And that's important because we follow Juliet, who is the heiress to the Scarlets, and Roma, who is the heir to the White Flowers. And as you can probably guess from their names, it's a bit of a Romeo-Juliet situation going on. Their families hate each other, but they don't, quite hate each other. They're forced to work together when a madness starts sweeping and killing members on both sides indiscriminately. Both Juliet and Roma want to protect not just their people in their gang, but also the people of Shanghai. They kind of feel that responsibility. As members of either of the two biggest gangs, a lot of what they sell is protection. So they feel a need to protect the members of this city because of that as well. So if that sounds interesting to you at all, that is the book that I'm going to be reviewing. Alright, so the way that Gong handles points of view in this book I feel like is very palatable. It is, as we see in a lot of young adult books, third person, past tense. We do follow several characters though, not just Roma and Juliet. A Cousin Apiece also has narrative focus, and in each section that's focused on each character, we are privy to their thoughts, but otherwise the narrative style isn't that different between, say, Juliet or her cousin Kathleen. And I feel like even though there are several focuses for the narration, the narrative voice never changes that much. This could be a really good example for somebody who has previously read books with only one, maybe two voices. This one peppers in a few extra ones, but in a very easy way to understand. So for this section, I really just wanted to point out that there are a lot of political things going on in the background. Most of the actual heads of the gangs are really focused on the politics going on in Shanghai right now. There are a lot of people there that are not native to Shanghai. There are a lot of governments trying to kind of impose their idea of what a good rule would be. And two, there's a heavy focus on the Communist Party, which doesn't really seem to have any founding in any of these other, like, oh, well, it's the Germans who brought them over, or anything like that. Even though Roma's family is Russian, so there is talk about like, oh, well, you guys would be good friends, right? No, not necessarily. Don't just, take that for granted. We left because we didn't really like that. So there are some descriptions of like various political mindsets, also some like thoughts on why somebody might go for that or not. So those can be a little bit more kind of adult or complex of themes to contemplate various political alignments and the mentalities different people would have to put their faith in those. It's something that isn't heavily focused on in the book, so if that's something that doesn't sound interesting to you, or you're not sure that you would want to recommend that kind of book to somebody, it is such a minor thing. However, I think it really adds to the story, so I think that if you're going in with the intent to ignore it, you're not going to be doing the full story justice. So either wait until you're more comfortable with it or something like that, but it really does add to the story, and even though it can be glossed over, I don't think it should be. Alright, so you would imagine there'd be a lot of steamy romance, right? With Romeo and Juliet, the most quintessential love story. But not. It even had less than Shakespeare's telling of it, where they consummate the marriage. No such thing in here. There are, I think, 2 different scenes where they either kiss or get very close to kissing and they're a little romantic. Nothing ever gets more intimate than that. This book seems primarily plot-driven as opposed to romance-driven. Alright, so the violence element did have me hesitating. This madness that's sweeping, that's causing people harm, is actually causing people to harm themselves by ripping out their own throats. And that in itself sounds very gross. Gong does a good job of trying to kind of sanitize it and make it more palatable for more people, but you can only describe that so many ways without it starting to get a little gross. And for me, that is an area I'm a little more sensitive to than than others. That's something I really have no urge to read about. There are a lot of other good elements to storytelling without getting into that kind of stuff. As I said, Gong does a good job of trying to sanitize it, but she does have the hurdles of trying to overcome people ripping out their own throats, bugs burrowing into skin, and also gangs. They're gangs. So there are a lot of references to people dying, to lots of gunfighting, and then also Juliet starts to strangle somebody. It's a threatening technique, and later she's like, oh, I never would have gone through with it, but still, the visual can be a little disturbing. So there are quite a few elements where violence and or bloody things come into play. So if that's something that you're really sensitive to, this might not be a book that would be good for you to read. Alright, so now that I got some of the more technical things out of the way that I like to point out when doing a review, now it's time for just my opinions on the book. And I touched on it a little bit in the romance element, and when I heard that this was going to be a retelling for Romeo and Juliet, actually when I got to that point in the book, since this book was picked out for me, I chose to go in as blind as possible. And when I found out it was Romeo and Juliet, I inwardly sighed because I was like, I don't like romance. I just don't really care. I kind of like when there's a little hint of it, but mostly it's just because I like to see the characters happy. If I care about them a lot, I like to see that they're happy. And so that's the only real way that I like romance, and that's almost exactly what happens in this book. Yes, because of the whole Romeo and Juliet thing, you kind of know they're going to get together, but they also kind of hint at that they were together, and then something happened. And that's how they set it up in the beginning of the book. But of course, they tell you what that is later in the book. It did take until 3/4 of the way through though. But they were together, they stopped seeing each other, and then now in the course of events in this book, they're forced to start interacting together again. And I really felt like I liked both characters. And so when those icy walls that they had built up towards each other started to come down a little bit, I was fine with that. The main focus of the story seemed to be on moving along the plot and figuring out what this madness was and cure it, slash stop people from falling prey to it and figuring out why this is happening. That really takes up the bulk of the book. There are a few hints. I like this too, that Gong didn't just take the whole, oh, this is Romeo and Juliet, so it's a romance. She took, well, this is Romeo and Juliet, and a lot of different things happen in the background. It's not just about them getting together. So I reread a synopsis of Romeo and Juliet real quick, and I realized that a lot of little details that she has ties in. I recognized a lot of the names, but they were tweaked a little bit. But when I reread the synopsis of Shakespeare's version, there are so many little things, like her going to party with Paris in Shakespeare's, Paul's and Gong's, but going to the party with him. That was a nice detail that I didn't remember from years ago when I read Shakespeare, but it's in here. And so I really like that Gong focused not just on the romance and the titular characters, but also the people in the background and kind of the climate of the city. I feel like that makes the book all the better for it. It really puts on an emphasis on the things that I'd forgotten from Shakespeare's version. But yeah, there's so many different things going on, and I really liked it. I'm glad that this book was picked out for me because I don't know that I would have picked it from the shelves myself, and it was a really good read. I'm really glad that I spent my time reading this book. Alright, so that was it. That was my review of These Violent Delights by Chloe Gong. A real quick, too long didn't watch would just be that I really enjoyed reading the book, and I would really recommend it for anybody who Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet really tickled their fancy, because this book focuses on a lot more elements about that entire story rather than just the romance itself. But also, as just its own book, it's very fun to read and very unique. I would also though put out a warning, there is a lot of violence in here. It does focus around two gangs, and also the sickness that's going around is a little bloody. So if that's something that you're particularly sensitive to, you might want to be careful if you decide to look at this book. But that's all my thoughts on it. So I just want to thank you so much for watching through the video for me. It really means a lot, and I hope that you enjoy your day.